Imagine waking up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from home, only to realize that beneath the dark waters around, you invisible steel predators are silently stalking your ship, waiting for the perfect moment to send you and hundreds of your brothers in arms to a watery grave in the freezing depths of the ocean. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was the daily reality for millions of Allied sailors during World War II, when German U-boats came closer than any other weapon to bringing the mighty Allied forces to their knees and changing the course of human history forever. Before we dive deep into this incredible story of underwater warfare that nearly decided the fate of the entire world, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell right now, because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about World War II. The year was 1939, and as Nazi Germany unleashed its war machine across Europe, most people believed that this conflict would be decided on land, with tanks rolling across battlefields and infantry charging through trenches. But deep in the minds of German naval strategists, a different kind of warfare was being planned. One that would take place in the vast, seemingly endless expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The German Kriegsmarine had learned a crucial lesson from the First World War. Britain, the heart of the Allied resistance, was an island nation that depended entirely on supplies from across the ocean. Cut off these supply lines, and even the mighty British Empire would starve. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the brilliant and ruthless commander of the German U-boat fleet, understood this weakness better than anyone. He had served on submarines during the Great War and witnessed firsthand how close Germany had come to victory through unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, 20 years later, he'd been given the opportunity to finish what his predecessors had started. But this time, he had something his predecessors never possessed: the most advanced submarine, technology the world had ever seen, and a generation of young German sailors who had been trained to think of themselves as underwater knights ready to die for the fatherland. The German U-boat, or Unterseeboot, was a marvel of engineering that represented the cutting edge of naval warfare. These steel sharks were designed to be invisible killers, capable of diving to depths where enemy ships couldn't reach them, traveling vast distances without being detected, and striking with devastating precision when their prey least expected it. The standard Type 7 U-boat was over 200 feet long, carried a crew of 44 men, but numbers alone cannot convey the terror that these machines inspired in the hearts of Allied sailors. Picture this: you're standing on the deck of a merchant vessel carrying vital supplies to Britain, when suddenly the lookout screams a warning that chills your blood: torpedo wake off the starboard bow. In that moment, you have perhaps 30 seconds to live. The torpedo, a 1,500-pound instrument of death, races through the water at 40 knots, its wake clearly visible as it approaches your ship like the finger of death itself. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and in most cases, no time even to pray. When Admiral Dönitz launched Operation Drumbeat in January 1942, he unleashed what would become known as the Second Happy Time for German U-boat crews. The operation was designed to bring the war directly to American shores, targeting merchant shipping along the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. The American coast was completely unprepared for this underwater blitz. Merchant ships continued to sail with their lights on, making them perfect targets against the glow of coastal cities. There was no convoy system, no coordinated defense, and certainly no understanding of the horror that was about to unfold. German U-boat commanders later described this period as a turkey shoot. So easy were the targets, and so devastating were the results. Captain Reinhard Hartigan, commanding U-123, was one of the first to reach American waters. As he approached the coast of New York, he could hardly believe his eyes. The city's lights blazed like a beacon in the darkness, silhouetting merchant ships against the glowing horizon. It was like Christmas, he would later recall. The Americans had given us the perfect gift. Targets lit up like Christmas trees, sailing alone and unprotected. On January 12, 1942, but the lives of men who had never expected to die so close to the safety of the American coast. This was just the beginning. Over the following 6 months, German U-boats sank over 400 Allied ships along the American coast, sending over 5,000 sailors and passengers to their deaths in the cold Atlantic waters. The carnage was so devastating that boaties regularly washed up on beaches from Florida to Maine, and the ocean itself seemed to burn as oil from sunken tankers spread across the waves like a blanket of death. Captain Horst Degen, commanding U-701, described the scene after sinking the tanker SS William A. Rockefeller. The entire ocean was on fire as far as the eye could see. The screams of the dying men mixed with the roar of the flames, creating a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But the true horror of the U-boat campaign was not just in the numbers. It was in the psychological warfare that these underwater predators waged against every Allied sailor who dared to venture into the Atlantic. Imagine being a young merchant marine, barely out of high school, suddenly thrust into a world where death could come from beneath the waves at any moment. You would scan the horizon constantly, looking for the telltale periscope or the white wake of an approaching torpedo. Sleep became impossible. Meals were eaten in terrified silence, and every unusual sound, a creaking bulkhead, a distant engine, or the cry of a seabird, could send your heart racing with fear. The psychological toll was immense. Survivor accounts describe men who would wake up screaming from nightmares about drowning, sailors who could unbear to be below decks because they feared being trapped if the ship was hit, and officers who aged years in the span of a single Atlantic crossing. The ocean itself became a source of terror, its vast, dark expanse hiding unseen enemies who could strike without warning and disappear without a trace. If this story has grabbed your attention so far, just wait until you hear what happened next. Make sure to hit that like button and share this video with anyone who loves incredible true stories of war, because what we're about to reveal will blow your mind. The German U-boat crews themselves were a unique breed of warriors. These men lived in conditions that would drive most people insane, crammed into steel tubes barely wider than a city bus. They would spend weeks at sea, submerged for up to 20 hours a day, never knowing if the next depth charge would crush their hull like an eggshell, or if their next surfacing would be their last. Yet these men developed a camaraderie and esprit de corps that was legendary even among their enemies. They called themselves the Grey Wolves, and they hunted in packs with a coordination and ferocity that terrified Allied commanders. A typical U-boat crew consisted of 44 men, ranging in age from 18 to 35, many of whom had never seen the ocean before the war began. They were welders, mechanics, farmers, and students who had been transformed into the most efficient killing machine the ocean had ever known. The daily life aboard a U-boat was a constant battle against claustrophobia, boredom, and the ever-present threat of death. The submarine's interior was a maze of pipes, valves, and machinery that left little room for the crew to move around. Men slept in bunks stacked 3 high, often sharing beds with different shifts. Fresh water was so scarce that bathing was forbidden, and the crew would go weeks without washing. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, diesel exhaust, and the ever-present dampness that seemed to seep into everything. But when the time came to attack, these men transformed into precision instruments of war. The process of stalking and sinking an enemy ship was a deadly dance that required perfect coordination between every member of the crew. The captain would peer through the periscope, calculating distance, speed, and angle, while the torpedo crew prepared their deadly cargo. The engine room would maintain perfect silence, knowing that even the slightest sound could give away their position to enemy sonar. Kapitän Lieutenant Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most successful U-boat commander, developed tactics that would become legendary in naval warfare. His philosophy was simple: one torpedo, one ship, sometimes surfacing right in the middle of an enemy convoy, and fire his torpedoes at point-blank range before disappearing into the darkness. His crew called him Silent Otto because of his ability to attack without being detected, and Allied sailors learned to fear his U-99 more than any other submarine in the German fleet. The impact of Kretschmer's tactics was devastating. In just 2 years, he sank 47 Allied ships, totaling over 270,000 tons, enough supplies to feed the entire city of London for months. Each ship he sank represented not just lost cargo, but lost lives. The SS Laurentic, a British armed merchant cruiser, went down in just 4 minutes after being hit by one of Kretschmer's torpedoes, taking 49 men with her. The merchant vessel Cossair exploded so violently that debris rained down on Kretschmer's own submarine, forcing him to dive to avoid being hit by pieces of the ship he had just destroyed. But Kretschmer's most audacious attack came on the night of October 18, 1940, when he penetrated the heart of convoy SC-7, surfacing right in the middle of 30 Allied ships. For 3 hours, he moved through the convoy like a ghost, sinking ship after ship while the escorts desperately tried to locate him. By dawn, 7 ships had been sent to the bottom, and Kretschmer had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only oil slicks and the screams of dying men. The human cost of these attacks was staggering. The merchant vessel, SS Blairmore, carrying a cargo of grain desperately needed in Britain, was hit by 2 torpedoes from Kretschmer's U-99. The ship broke in half within minutes, trapping most of the crew below decks. Those who managed to escape found themselves in the freezing Atlantic water, miles from shore, with no hope of rescue. Of the 42 men aboard, only 12 survived long enough to be picked up by a passing destroyer. One survivor, able seaman James MacDonald, described the terror of those final moments. The first torpedo hit us amidships, and I felt the whole ship shudder like a wounded animal. Before I could even think, the second torpedo struck near the engine room, and the lights went out. The ship began to list immediately, and I knew we were done for. I could hear the screams of men trapped below, but there was nothing we could do. The ship was going down, and anyone who wasn't on deck in the next minute would go down with her. MacDonald managed to grab a life jacket and jump overboard, just as the ship's stern rose out of the water. He spent 6 hours in the freezing Atlantic, watching his shipmates die one by one from hypothermia before finally being rescued by HMS Highlander. "I still wake up at night," he said years later, "hearing the sound of that ship breaking apart and the voices of my friends calling for help in the darkness." The psychological impact of these attacks extended far beyond the immediate victims. News of U-boat attacks spread through the Allied merchant marine like wildfire, and recruitment for dangerous Atlantic crossings became increasingly difficult. Ships would sit in port for weeks, unable to find crews willing to risk the voyage. Those who did volunteer demanded hazard pay and life insurance policies that many shipping companies couldn't afford. The British government, desperate to keep the supply lines open, began a massive propaganda campaign to encourage merchant sailors to continue their vital work. Posters appeared in every port showing heroic sailors braving the Atlantic storm, while newspapers ran stories about the brave men who kept Britain fed and supplied. But behind the propaganda was a darker truth. The German U-boats were winning the war. By the summer of 1942, German submarines were sinking Allied ships faster than they could be built. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. If the current rate of losses continued, food rationing had already reduced the average British citizen to near starvation levels, and critical war materials were becoming increasingly scarce. The Royal Navy, the pride of the British Empire, was being systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't catch, and couldn't defeat. Admiral Dönitz, watching his U-boats devastate Allied shipping from his headquarters in France, believed that victory was within reach. His submarines had created what he called a tonnage war, a race between German U-boats sinking Allied ships and Allied shipyards building new ones. By his calculations, Germany was winning this race by a significant margin. Intelligence reports suggested that British morale was cracking, and there were rumors of secret peace negotiations between London and Berlin. But the German admiral had underestimated the resilience of his enemies and the power of human ingenuity when faced with extinction. The Allies were about to unleash a series of technological and tactical innovations that would turn the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic and ultimately seal the fate of the German U-boat fleet. The first breakthrough came in the form of improved sonar technology. The ASDIC system, developed by British scientists, could detect submerged submarines at distances of up to 2,000 yards. This gave Allied escort vessels the ability to hunt down U-boats, even when they were hidden beneath the waves. The psychological impact on German submarine crews was immediate and devastating. They were no longer invisible predators, but hunted prey. Kapitänleutnant Joachim Schepke, commanding U-100, was one of the first to experience this new reality. The HMS Vanoc, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Donald McIntyre, pursued U-100 for 3 hours before finally getting close enough to drop depth charges. The underwater explosions were like the wrath of God himself, crushing the submarine's hull and killing Schepke and most of his crew instantly. Mueller, one of only 6 survivors, described the final moments. The depth charges exploded all around us, and I felt like I was inside a bell being struck by a giant hammer. The lights went out, water began pouring in, and I could hear the hull cracking like ice. I knew we were all going to die, but technological advances alone weren't enough to defeat the U-boat menace. The Allies needed a new strategy that would use their superior numbers and industrial capacity to overwhelm the German submarines. The solution came in the form of the convoy system, a tactical innovation that would fundamentally change the nature of naval warfare. The convoy system was deceptively simple. Instead of allowing merchant ships to sail alone, they would be grouped together in large formations and protected by warships specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. These escort vessels, armed with depth charges, sonar, and radar, would create a protective screen around the merchant ships, making it virtually impossible for U-boats to attack without being detected and destroyed. The first major test of this new system came in September 1942, when convoy ONS 154 set out from Liverpool. Bound for New York, the convoy consisted of 43 merchant ships carrying vital supplies and was escorted by 6 corvettes, 4 destroyers, and 1 frigate. German intelligence had detected the convoy's departure, and Admiral Dönitz ordered a wolf pack of 12 U-boats to intercept and destroy it. What followed was one of the most brutal naval battles of the entire war. For 4 days and nights, the German submarines stalked the convoy, attacking again and again while the escort vessels fought desperately to protect their charges. The ocean became a battlefield where invisible enemies fought to the death beneath the waves, while above, merchant sailors watched in terror as their sister ships exploded and sank around them. The battle began at dawn on September 23rd, when U-221, commanded by Oberleutnant Hans-Hartwig Trojer, penetrated the convoy's screen and fired a spread of torpedoes into the formation. The first torpedo struck the SS Empire Moon, a British freighter carrying aircraft parts for the RAF. The ship exploded in a massive fireball that could be seen for miles, killing all 67 men aboard instantly. But this time, the escort vessels were ready. HMS Dianthus, a Flower-class corvette commanded by Lieutenant Commander C.E. Bridgman, immediately detected U-221's position and began dropping depth charges. The underwater explosions bracketed the German submarine, forcing Trojer to dive to his maximum depth and flee the area. For the first time in the war, a U-boat had been forced to break off an attack due to aggressive countermeasures. The battle raged for 3 more days, with U-boats attacking from all directions, while the escort vessels fought to keep them at bay. The merchant ships, arranged in tight formation, steamed steadily westward, while explosions lit up the ocean around them. Men died by the hundreds as ships were torpedoed, depth-charged, and rammed in the desperate struggle for control of the North Atlantic. On the final night of the battle, U-boats made one last desperate attempt to break through the convoy's defenses. 8 submarines attacked simultaneously, launching over 30 torpedoes at the tightly packed merchant ships. The ocean erupted in explosions as ships began exploding and sinking on all sides. The SS Empire Tiger, carrying aviation fuel, went up in an inferno that turned night into day, while the SS Trevally broke in half and sank within minutes. But the escort vessels fought back with a fury that surprised even their own crews. HMS Foxglove, a corvette that had been damaged in an earlier attack, rammed U-24 as it tried to escape after torpedoing a merchant ship. The submarine's hull was crushed like a tin can, and all 44 crew members were killed instantly. HMS Snowflake dropped depth charges on U-617, forcing the submarine to surface where it was immediately destroyed by gunfire. When the battle finally ended, the convoy had lost 12 ships and over 800 men, but 5 German U-boats had been destroyed with all hands. More importantly, the convoy system had proven that it could defeat the Wolfpack tactics that had been so successful for the German submarine fleet. The tide of the Battle of the Atlantic was beginning to turn. The psychological impact of this victory was enormous. For the first time since the war began, Allied sailors felt they had a fighting chance against the U-boat menace. The convoy system gave them a sense of security and purpose. They were no longer helpless victims, but part of a coordinated defense against their underwater tormentors. But the German U-boat fleet was far from defeated. Admiral Dönitz, recognizing that his tactics needed to evolve, began developing new strategies that would test the convoy system to its limits. He ordered his submarine commanders to attack with even greater aggression, using new torpedo designs that could home in on the sound of ship engines and depth charges that could be detonated at predetermined depths. The technological arms race that followed would push both sides to the limits of human ingenuity. The Germans developed the Type 21 submarine, a revolutionary design that could remain submerged for weeks and travel at speeds that made it nearly impossible to catch. The Allies responded with improved radar, better sonar, and long-range aircraft that could hunt U-boats even in the middle of the Atlantic. The human cost of this technological warfare was staggering. By 1943, the average life expectancy of a U-boat crew was just 2 patrols. Of the 40,000 men who served in the German submarine fleet during World War II, over 30,000 never returned home. They died in steel coffins hundreds of feet beneath the surface, crushed by depth charges, drowned in flooded compartments, or killed by their own torpedo explosions. The Allied losses were equally devastating. Over 30,000 merchant sailors died in the Battle of the Atlantic, many of them civilians who had volunteered to serve their countries in the most dangerous job on Earth. They died in burning oil slicks, froze to death in lifeboats, or were killed instantly when their ships exploded around them. Each death represented not just a personal tragedy, but a blow to the Allied war effort that could have changed the course of history. The final phase of the Battle of the Atlantic began in May 1943, when a combination of new technology, improved tactics, and sheer determination finally tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. The introduction of centimetric radar allowed escort vessels to detect surfaced U-boats at night, while improved sonar could track submerged submarines with deadly accuracy. Long-range aircraft based in Britain, Iceland, and Canada could now patrol the entire Atlantic, eliminating the air gap that had previously allowed U-boats to operate with impunity. The death blow to the German U-boat fleet came during the Battle for Convoy, ONS-5, in May 1943. A wolf pack of 15 U-boats attacked the convoy over a period of 5 days, but they were met by a defense so fierce and coordinated that it broke the back of the German submarine campaign. 6 U-boats were destroyed, while the convoy lost only 7 ships. The mathematics of the tonnage war had finally turned against Germany. Admiral Dönitz, watching his submarine fleet being systematically destroyed, finally admitted defeat. On May 24, 1943, he issued the order that effectively ended the Battle of the Atlantic. All U-boats were to be withdrawn from the north. Atlantic convoy routes, the Grey Wolves, had been defeated, and with them, Germany's last hope of winning the war. The consequences of this victory were immediate and far-reaching. With the Atlantic sea lanes secure, the Allies could finally begin the massive buildup of men and materials that would lead to the D-Day invasion. American troops, tanks, and aircraft poured into Britain, while vital supplies kept the British war machine running. The U-boat threat that had once seemed insurmountable had been overcome through a combination of courage, innovation, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The Battle of the Atlantic had been the longest continuous battle of World War II, lasting from the first day of the war to the final German surrender. It had claimed over 72,000 lives and had brought the Allied cause to the brink of defeat. The men who fought and died in this underwater war had saved civilization itself, though most of them never lived to see the final victory. The story of the U-boat campaign is ultimately a story about the power of human determination in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The German submarine crews, fighting in conditions that would have broken lesser men, came closer to defeating the Allies than any other weapon in the Nazi arsenal. But they were ultimately defeated by men who were equally determined, equally brave, and equally willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. The legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic lives on in every convoy that crosses the ocean. Every sailor who serves on a submarine, and every person who understands that freedom is not free. The men who fought in this epic struggle, whether they wore German gray or Allied blue, were all heroes in their own way. Warriors who faced death in the most terrible conditions imaginable, and who changed the course of human history through their courage and sacrifice. The next time you look out at the ocean, remember that beneath those peaceful waves lies one of the greatest battlefields in human history. The steel hulks of hundreds of ships and submarines rest on the ocean floor, silent monuments to the men who fought and died in the Battle of the Atlantic. Their sacrifice ensured that we could live in a world where freedom, democracy, and human dignity could triumph over tyranny and oppression. This is their story, a story of heroes and villains, of courage and terror, of technology and humanity. It is a story that must never be forgotten, because it reminds us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and that even in our darkest hour, human courage can overcome any obstacle. Thanks for watching this incredible journey through one of history's most dramatic and decisive battles. If you want to hear more amazing stories like this one, make sure to subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore another incredible chapter in the epic story of human courage and determination.